Hi everyone, welcome to episode 20 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. In this episode, I interview Paul Bennetts and Kaushik Sen, two of the co-founders of Spaceship, one of the most exciting startups to be announced this year. Spaceship is a mobile-only superannuation platform that will have a technology focus in its investment mandate. In the interview, Paul and Kaushik share how to form a rockstar team, how to get buy-in from industry influencers, and building from first principles. Without further ado, here is my interview with Paul and Kaushik. Hi, Paul and Kaushik. Welcome to the Startup Playbook Podcast, and thanks for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks, Rohit. Thanks for having me.
So, for those people that maybe aren't as familiar with you, both of you and your backgrounds, can you share a little bit of your story and what got you here today?
Sure. My name's Paul. Some of your listeners may have come across me in my previous life at Ep020 Ventures, where we raised $60 million to invest in Series A opportunities across Australia. The guys at Ep020 have just announced a $250 million fund, which I'm a venture partner of, and I have stepped back from my day-to-day role to launch a spaceship.
And I'm Kaushik Sen. I've spent about 10 years in the super industry, various roles at AMP and ANZ Bank and ING. I also spent some time in Europe with ING, working with their IT department over there. I'm an engineer by background, and I kind of landed up in super by accident and spent a lot of time there, learned a lot about the industry, also developed some pretty interesting insights, I think, on how we could do things better, and that's what drove me to Spaceship.
Yeah, on that, I was about to ask, both of you had really interesting and exciting roles and interesting backgrounds. What sort of got you interested in Spaceship and wanting to put this together in the first place?
I think like stepping back, superannuation is actually a fascinating industry, but no one knows that much about it. Like if you and the reason I can say this is I was just having a conversation with someone from New Zealand, and they don't have a superannuation scheme at all. There is no sort of forced saving, and he was asking me about, well, what is it? What is this super thing that you guys do? And I was trying to explain it to him. I was like, how do you explain it to someone who doesn't live in this country and understand why super exists? And my best attempt of explaining it was that the government started, worrying that we were a population of people that were quickly moving towards retirement, and if we didn't make sure that everyone had enough retirement savings, then we would have a huge problem for government in that, someone has to pay for it. Someone has to pay for people's inability to work, and if the inability to work is because they're 70 years old or 80 years old or something, it's usually a pension, a sort of government-funded pension. That costs a lot to fund if there's a lot of people who require it. So what the government did was they said, hey, how about we just get everyone and force them to save? And the initial version of superannuation was a 6.5% forced saving requirement. So 6.5% of your salary would be nominated to go into a fund, and that fund would be a locked box that you couldn't touch for 30 years. And at the end of the 30 years of your retirement age, which was I think 60 odd when it first started, then you get access to it. And that's been a very successful scheme. We've now got $2 trillion worth of assets in funds managed by superannuation funds. There's about 250 funds in Australia that are looking after Australia's retirement savings. And the government has thought more deeply about how that scheme should be set up. And one of the things that we see as a trend is that 6.5% of your salary is probably not enough, to retire with. And so what the government has done is push that to 9.5% now. So now 9.5%, almost 10% of everyone's salaries are put in a lockbox until they retire. And that's only increasing. So there's a mandate that will likely increase to 12% by 2025. And when we saw all this going on, for me, quite personally, is I really want to know where 10% of my salary is going. If I'm going to be able to retire when I'm 65 or 70 years old, I want to know that where that money is being invested over the next 30 to 50 years is being done well. But the more we all looked into it, was you talk to other people and say, hey, what are you doing with your super, man? What companies are you invested in? How are you thinking about this kind of investment bucket? And the sad thing is most people don't even know where their super is, and worse yet, they don't know the ingredients of their super fund. They don't know what companies they're invested in. And yet people are so fascinated with, understanding everything around them, whether it's, the food they eat, where that food's coming from, the ingredients of that food, and being, hey, I want to live a long time, I should make sure I eat healthy. But at the same time, no one even looks at the back of the label of a superannuation fund. So we see this kind of, without kind of going on for too long on your podcast, we see this disengaged audience in super, an immense amount of wealth sitting in 250 funds, and we worry that we should probably understand what's happening with our capital and whether it's been run the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know personally, I for a long time didn't know where my super was, let alone what it was being invested in. So definitely a very disengaged audience when it comes to that. But how does Spaceship specifically work in terms of the investing and moving super from my own fund to Spaceship?
So it's a really good question. So for the way I like to think about it is thinking through our generation. So if you are a millennial, if you're aged between the age of 18 to 35, you've grown up with the internet. You've grown up with technology completely immersing itself through society. And that to us is pretty exciting. We've watched the 5 most valuable companies in the world all become technology companies. And it's not sort of .com pets.com type frothy valuations and eyeballs and not really kind of much substance to these companies. These 5 companies all together generated something like $90 billion worth of profit last year. They have more cash on their balance sheet than they know what to do with. They're all leaders in their industry. They're all have strategies for the long term and building out defensible business models that will be worth much, much more in a decade from now than they are today. So that's pretty exciting. That's exciting for our generation to kind of watch that take place, and it's pretty easy for us to kind of come to the viewpoint that going forward, technology is absolutely going to be the key to differentiation or enablement for all companies going forward. So if you're not a company thinking through technology and how it will enable your business or differentiate your business and create defensibility, then you're going to get left behind. And what that means for us is that we looked at the way current super funds are investing our retirement savings, and this is my personal opinion, they don't seem that differentiated. They all seem to be investing the same way.
And there's a massive skew towards certain, let's call them easier investments, such as in Australian shares, which is dominated by 4 big banks, a couple of miners, and an aging telco. And we looked at this investment strategy and we thought, well why?
Absolutely why. And like what I mean, if you don't need capital for 30 to 50 years, then you're in a privileged place in the financial markets to build a portfolio with true long-term decisions. That's unheard of. That incentive structure is not found elsewhere. So we think that's really exciting. And when you looked at the investment strategies and the investment teams of super funds, we weren't convinced that they were doing the very best they could in a performance-orientated manner that we want to kind of instill within this industry.
Absolutely. Speaking of teams, you have a pretty rockstar team behind you. Can you share who some of the other team members are that are involved and how it all kind of came together?
Yeah, sure. So there's 4 of us in the team. I'll talk about the other guys who aren't here at the moment. So we've got Andrew Sellon. He's the CEO, and his background is that he was the marketing director of Australian Ethical Super, which is one of the super funds that's actually been growing consistently in the market. So in 3 years, he took through marketing efforts, mostly direct marketing, he took their growth from 80 customers a month to about 800 customers a month, and he grew their funds under management from $500 million to $1.5 billion. So he's got a very, very good. He's very, very good at communicating to customers and getting them to understand the benefits of investing your super. And then we've got Dave Kuhn. He has a long history in the startup community. He's our CTO. So he was in the first batch of StartMate. So he was in StartMate 2010, moved to Silicon Valley for a while, came back to Australia. I'd worked with, so the connection is that I'd worked with Dave about 10 years ago at ING. It was both of us was one of our first jobs. I stayed in the super industry for 10 years, like I said earlier, but Dave went off and focused on technology. And then about 6 months ago, I was sitting down with Dave and we were talking about the idea of starting a super fund. Dave knew Andrew through church. They had a 5-year friendship through that, and he said, we should talk to Andrew. He'd be a great marketing person. And then we met Paul along the way, which was really interesting because basically Paul, we actually pitched to Paul, which is a pretty funny story. And then we connected later on, and Paul became our chief investment officer.
Yeah, must have been a pretty compelling pitch then to go from pitching to an investor to them jumping on board as a team member. But I'm
not sure about that, but maybe.
I was reading an article that the initial concept for the pitch came across from having a few beers. How does one of the things that I kind of see from meeting with a lot of early stage founders is they have really big vision of what it is that they want to do, but they find the first few steps really difficult. Super funds, trying to launch a new super fund in a very, very traditional market is difficult. How did you guys go from taking that initial inception of the concept over beers to what it is now?
I think we looked at it from the point of view of what are the biggest barriers to doing what we wanted to do, and the biggest challenges in this industry are around regulation and doing the right thing by regulation, which we take very seriously. So that was the first thing we tackled. We looked at how we would launch a compliant super fund that would pass the rigorous tests put forward by APRA and ASIC, and we cleared that hurdle together. That's what we did over a few months. Once we were confident that we could do that, then we were in a position to take it to the next level and actually talk about a real product and deliver it. So I think for early stage founders, I think one of the things it's hard to do is what's the first thing I need to do? And every industry has a different, whatever you're trying to do, there'll be something different that is the first thing. I think you have to agree on that as a team, clear that hurdle, and then go for it.
I think my perspective on it would be that, and I had a really good thought, now I've lost it, is you need to kind of start with a very strong opinion. So if you're looking at an industry or a sort of delivery of a good or service, you need a very strong opinion of how that really should work, right? And the more different your opinion or view of the world compared to the existing set or the existing experience is the more likely that you may be onto something that's valuable in a sort of high growth venture startup way. If your view of the world is kind of, hey, the engine of this business should be not a V6 but a V8, you're really just kind of extending the existing set. The most valuable businesses are built where they kind of go, no, you shouldn't even drive a car, you should drive a horse. You know what I mean? You're completely changing the way things work. So when we kind of did a lot of time thinking, on super, we firstly was like mapping out how the industry works now, and thinking from first principles. Well, how do we want it to work, and why isn't the good or service that Paul wants as an investment portfolio doesn't exist? Why isn't that really easy to get? Well, it feels bananas that there's no super fund that just caters for millennials, and it's bananas that there's no super fund that's technology focused. Why doesn't that exist? Why in the past 20 years has that never existed? So firstly, it was about kind of really understanding the nuts and bolts of the incentive structures of the industry and the way players within the industries work, and then thinking through how you would do this from a sort of first principles nature. So I don't know, I riffed on that a bit far, but hopefully that's helpful.
Sure. Speaking of doing things a bit differently, I really wanted to ask you guys about your social media strategy, which is something really interesting and unique. Can you share a little bit about some of the thinking behind that?
I think what we're trying to do is that there's 5 million people aged between 18 and 35 in this country. Our go-to-market strategy is we want to be seen as sort of the default choice, or for anyone within the startup ecosystem, right? That's kind of step one, and it's an obvious step one because who understands technology and the impact of technology on the world more than anyone who's touched the startup ecosystem? And that's not just founders and people working within startups. That's anyone who attends a startup ecosystem event. So that could be lawyers, accountants, finance people, etc., etc. But our kind of what we really want to do is we really want to make an impact to the 5 million people who work across this country in our age bracket, not just people within startups and tech. To cut through to those people, to sort of cross that chasm is non-trivial. And for us to be able to do that, we have to have the courage to try things very, very different. And so what we're doing and what we'll be doing over the next few months is trying a number of marketing experiments, of which the majority of which will fail. But eventually we'll come across something that cuts through, that really kind of helps marry our vision for the business and sync up with what the market's looking for. So that's what we're doing. So what we're doing on social media is one small part of a wider plan to do a bunch of experiments to see what sticks.
Fantastic. I'll make sure that the links to all of your social media channels are on the show notes so everyone can go and take a look. I think it's really fascinating what you guys are doing on social. But in terms of having the technology focus and the fund itself, will you be investing purely in technology startups moving forward, or what's I guess the focus for the fund itself when you look to invest?
Yeah, I think we're building a portfolio from first principles, right? And we're building a portfolio that is very long term in nature, right? What we've found in our generation is the most wonderful companies in the world are technology businesses primarily, right? So technology on itself is not very valuable. So if I built an airline back in the 20s, I made no money. Technology in itself isn't valuable, but technology wrapped with differentiation and defensibility by a business model is very valuable. And the most valuable companies in the world are becoming technology-enabled or technology-differentiated companies. So if you believe that and you can understand that, you also see that the most wonderful companies in the world are kicking goals over a quarter or over 6 months. Their growth curves happen over a decade or longer. So the best investor for those growth curves are pension funds or superannuation funds. So when we think about how do you construct a portfolio that's right for the next 30 to 50 years, we firstly think, well, you should make it up of wonderful businesses that are executing long-term growth curves over a long time. That doesn't mean we give you 5 technology stocks as your portfolio. What it does mean is we have a core of technology businesses in your portfolio, and then we build diversification around it.
Sure. And will you be looking at opportunities purely in Australia, or will there be a global focus?
So it's absolutely a global focus. So we think that's the strangest decision that's ever made when people think about asset allocation. in that if you have a time horizon of 30 or 50 years, why is your country of birth your first investment decision? So if you live in Australia, you must have 30 or 50% of your portfolio in Australian stocks. But if you were born in Brazil, you have 30 or 50% of your assets in Brazilian stocks. I wish someone could explain that to me, because I can't quite figure out why that makes sense. So for us, we're like, forget geographic boundaries. Atlassian here locally is now bigger than Qantas, our national airline, but it's listed on the NASDAQ. Is that an Australian company, or is it an American company, or is it a global company? So we're building a portfolio from first principles for the long term that has our technology thesis at the core of the portfolio, but it is well diversified around that.
Sure. And again, why is the focus of the product mobile only?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we believe that the demographic, or the group of people that we're in, the millennial group, we've grown up with mobility as a default, and that's really what you're seeing out there today. Having your super, on your mobile phone makes a whole bunch of things easier, such as letting you know when you've been paid your contributions by your employer, for example. So we looked at it and we went, well, we are very much, we are pretty much a mobile-only product on a day-to-day level. That's how I think people should be dealing with their super.
I think just what I'd add to that, taking a step back, is the existing experience for superannuation is that you get a statement mailed to you at the end of the year. It may be through email, but it's still mailed to you, where the predominantly it's talking through the fees that you're charged over the last 12 months, and that's about as much communication you get from your super fund. That may be a gross exaggeration, but it's certainly how I felt as a customer over the last 10 years. And what we thought about, well, how do you want to be communicated to about someone who's looking after what could possibly be your most important asset approaching retirement? And what we thought is, well, I want to know what they're thinking, what they're doing, and why they're doing it. So our goal with communicating to our members and having a relationship with people who are part of Spaceship is, hey, we want them to be able to turn to the person next to them and say, I'm in these companies for this reason, and they've just made this decision. And so the way that communication looks is more, it's not on a yearly communication. It's not some yearly statement saying, hey, we charge you this much, thanks a lot. Mm-hmm. It's about, can you spend 20 minutes with Spaceship a week? Can someone sit down with you like you sit down with someone over a coffee and just give you a download of what's happened? Like what the hell are people doing over a course of a year in a super fund? I want to know what they did over the last week. Talk me through it. Yeah. So we want to bring transparency and a real sense of ownership to what people have in their super funds, and we're super excited about that.
Absolutely. I think one of the, again, just going back to a lot of what I see in startups is a lot of people do things for the sake of doing things. So they go mobile first for the sake of going mobile only for the sake of going mobile only. What I like about what you guys are doing is that there's a real sort of thought process and very targeted things in terms of your social media, in terms of the experience that you're providing for the millennials that you're trying to reach. But I guess going into you guys getting this up and running, you've got a who's who of people that are kind of backing you in the startup space. People like Mike Cannon-Brookes, Lee Jasper. How important was it for you guys to have sort of backing from the industry for you to execute on this?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for any financial product is trust. We need trust in ourselves that we're managing our own super by doing this, and we need the trust of others that we know what we're doing and we're the right people for the job. So the first part of that was convincing the smartest people in the room that they should transfer their super to us, and that's anyone from Mike to we've got about 40 tech influencers. Yep. We've got people like Andrew Rothery, the co-founder of Tyro.
Andrew Rothwell. There's another guy called Andrew Rothery with
Andrew Rothwell from Tyro, who's transferring his super to us. We've got people like Jane Liu from Shopo, who's transferring some super to us. The reason is that we're a technology focused fund, so the people who help us communicate to a wider audience that, hey, we kind of know what we're talking about, is people who've done very, very well with technology. So that's the reason why we're aligning ourselves with those folks.
And also, like, the background, we were trying to align ourselves with people who are just incredible business people. The two folks that you mentioned, I mean, Lee runs a $1 billion company. And Mike is, obviously CEO of Atlassian, but also a board member of Tyro. So very much across what it takes to launch a competitive, a brand new bank inside a very competitive and very regulated industry. So just heaps and heaps of value working with those guys.
Absolutely. And for I guess other startup founders that are listening to this episode that most likely play in a different space to you and are trying to work with influencers or get buy-in from influencers in their own space, do you have any recommendations on how you sort of build those relationships or get people to buy in?
That's a good question.
It's a good question, and I think I'll have a go at answering.
Go, please.
I mean, one of the things we found, I think, and I've definitely found, is that these things take a little bit of time. That it takes time, and you have to get involved. So you have to be unafraid to get out there and do things like join, create a concept and try to pitch for StartMate. Do that. Find out what other people are doing every year with StartMate and other accelerators like that. Be involved in the scene. Find great people to work with, and then give it time.
Yeah,
it doesn't happen overnight.
I completely agree. I think like when I was growing up, I was very passionate about the idea that you could sit alone in a room and craft something by yourself, and there was kind of an excitement to that. But the reality is you can't do anything in this world unless you're connected to others. Unless you have resources around you and people who believe in you around you. And the only way that happens is by sort of shouting from the rooftop what your views are, what your opinions are, and what you're trying to do. So most people kind of hug their ideas and are worried about people taking them away from them. I think you'd agree with me that you should. The amount of people we've spoke to when we literally had nothing but a sheet of paper with our idea on it. Most people would think that was bananas, but we had nothing. We'd kind of run around and say, "God, we're so passionate about this. We want to do this. This is crazy that the world works like this. We want to change it." And that was more helpful than anything else. But if you speak to most people, they seem to be afraid to do that. So I think anyone out there who wants to do something, they should shout it from the rooftops. And if there's substance to it, and you're the right guy for the job, then people will get behind you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think something that's often overlooked is the adding value piece of that component as well. So people will expect influencers and other people to just jump on, but if you don't offer some sort of value in return for people to want to build those networks, to want to build those relationships, to want to get involved, it can be a struggle for that to happen as well. So Paul and Kaushik, for anyone who wants to get in touch, find out more about Spaceship, or follow either of you and your story, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, look, the best way to we're reaching out to people who are on our wait list all the time. So if you go to www.spaceship.com.au, sign up to our wait list, which is put in your email address, and we will periodically communicate with you. We also have that sounds terrible. Periodically, we'll write to you regularly and tell you where we're up to.
Yeah, we're not Big Brother or anything.
We're not Big Brother,
we're
pretty approachable guys.
Yeah.
Also, we all have Twitter accounts. We're all on Facebook.
Emails.
And just hit us up. hello@spaceship.com.au if you want to find out more.
Or our first names. Paul@spaceship.com.au. Like we're at Tyro FinTech Labs on 155 Clarence Street. Come say hi.
Yeah.
But we would love if what we're trying to do resonates with your listeners. Please join our wait list and give us a chance. Transfer your super on day one and join the journey.
Speaking of day one, do you guys have an expected launch date for Spaceship, or a rough time period that you can give to our listeners?
We'll be very, very disappointed. I'm sorry. We'll be very disappointed if we're not launched before the end of the year.
Yep, that's what we're tracking to.
Excellent.
And we're running very, very hard, and we're very stressed out. and we're working very, very long hours to get this thing done. And we'll be the happiest we've ever been once we're out in the market. So it's not far off. So hang in there.
Perfect. Looking forward to it. Guys, thanks so much for your time and for sharing your story today. And looking forward to hearing some more amazing things from Spaceship.
Cool, man. Thanks,
man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to episode 20 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. You can find the show notes of my interview with Paul and Kaushik, along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. As always, you can join the conversation through our Twitter account. The handle is @PlaybookStartup. In episode 21, I interviewed Ben Sand. Ben is the co-founder and former co-CEO of augmented reality headset startup Meta, which has raised over $73 million US. Ben is now the entrepreneur in residence at Telstra's Murudi Accelerator program in Sydney. In the interview, Ben shares the importance of intensity, what you need to do before building products, and how to reverse engineer storytelling. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at episode 21 next week.